Why, hi there, I'm Ron Chuckett. Along with me is Ricky Keeler and our contributor, Matt Wyrich, I think. And it's time for the DoDCast for this January 18th, 2017. How we doing, gang?
We're good, Ron. How you doing?
Doing fine, thanks. And our contributor, Matt Wyrich, I think. And it's time for the DoDCast.
Thanks for having me on.
January 18th, 2017. How we doing, gang? I don't know why that just did that.
Ron, how you doing?
Doing fine. Oh, hold on a sec.
Thanks for having me on.
A little technical difficulty here.
Why that just did that. You know, helpful live television tip. When you start something and you have YouTube open, you got to mute it.
That would help.
That would help. Let's start this again. How we doing, gang?
Doing good, Ron. How you doing?
I'm good.
I'm good, thanks. First of all, we want to congratulate the 3 players to be enshrined this year in Cooperstown. Tim Raines of the Montreal Expos, Ivan Rodriguez, who will go on as a Texas Ranger, and Jeff Bagwell as a Houston Astro. What's your guys' thoughts on that?
Matt, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I think it's a little small, but looking at the 3 candidates, I would have voted for all 3. I mean, Pudge is one of the greatest defensive catchers of all time, 13 Gold Gloves. Guy is up there with Johnny Bench, in my opinion, is one of the best catchers of all time. Overall, I have nothing wrong with it. I would have liked to see Edgar Martinez, Vlad get a little bit more love, but overall, I have nothing wrong with those 3.
Ricky?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, Raines was long overdue. I never saw Tim Raines, but I did a lot of research on Tim Raines, wrote a couple articles on him for the or District on Deck. One of the best stolen base guys out there, probably in the history of the game, especially in the National League. Jeff Bagwell, the power, and Ivan Rodriguez, like Matt said, defensively and with his power. And I'm not one of those guys that holds it against you for suspicions of PEDs or PEDs in general, which I'm sure we'll get into. So I'm not really one of those people that's going to hold against Pudge for being in Jose Canseco's book. So even though that's probably the most out of the whole suspicious compared to Bagwell and Piazza from the past. So in the end, I think Hoffman kind of got slighted, but he's only 5 votes off. He'll get in next year. And Vladimir Guerrero, who's only a few % off, he should probably get in next year too.
I was more upset with the 2 people who submitted blank ballots.
Mm-hmm.
That's just stupid. I was doing some stuff. I did a slideshow today on who's going to be the first player to wear the curly W in the Hall of Fame. And obviously it wasn't going to be Pudge, but because there was a chance he was getting in, I included him. One year he threw out 60% of would-be base stealers. 60! Just unfathomable how good that is. I think even at the tail end with the Nats, I think the one year he was their primary catcher, 2010, he still threw out close to 40%. I did see Raines play quite a bit because I live near Montreal, and this is long overdue. He, of course, was never really, when you play in the long shadow of Ricky Henderson, that's going to hurt you. Just kind of like it has Hoffman playing in the shadow of Bo Rivera. And I think that Raines' drug abuse in the 80s hurt him a little bit too with some voters. But legit Hall of Famer, and Bagwell should have been years ago. I don't understand why the wait.
Well, they all had suspicions of some type of drug. I mean, both Pudge and Bagwell were connected to PEDs. Pudge was mentioned, Jose Canseco's book. But, I mean, I think the voters came around. I mean, they're clearly coming around with Clemens and Bonds as well, which necessarily I don't agree with. But there's no real concrete evidence to support that. I can't see any reason as to why I would conclude that they are for sure drug users. So I dismiss those allegations. And then for Raines, I mean, the whole coke thing was his career, and he came out, he was honest about it, he apologized, led a pretty good career. I can see that as something maybe he did while he was young, but turned around and away.
They were pretty common in that decade too. I mean, he wasn't the only one that got busted with it. And as Ricky knows, in New York, Keith Hernandez. I mean, there was a whole bunch of them that went on trial to testified against a dealer in Pittsburgh back in about 84, 85. As it, what you know, that's when money started to get big, and you got to spend it somewhere, and so that's how they did it.
So the big question I think now going forward is you look at some of the guys who jumped, as we talked about Hoffman and Vlad, you talked about Edgar Martinez, or not really, but Edgar Martinez jumped up, but more importantly, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens moved up the ballot now. Both Ron and I have ballots on the IBWAA, and kind of different because Bagwell, Raines, Edgar Martinez, a lot of guys that got in on that already, so our ballots are like a little smaller compared to, because it was tough who to vote for general. If I had an actual vote, and I have this in my IBWA vote, I would vote for Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. Partly that I was a huge Barry Bonds fan as a kid. But I understand the drug. You could have any stance on PEDs. My mind is you have the greatest hitter and greatest pitcher in this generation. I don't think you can have a history of the game without those two. And I think now that you've got the guys with the suspicion, because I think the Canseco book, while it's an allegation, I mean, a lot of the guys like McGuire is in that book. McGuire is not in the Hall of Fame. So it depends on how you view it. But I think now as we sort of see the new writers come in, the new generation come in, I think those two will get in. And I think if you put something on the plaque for it, then I think it tells the story and it tells it the right way. I understand not honoring them, but I think you have to have them in at some point because you can't ignore the best hitter and pitcher of this era, which I think those two are.
I think you got to kind of make that delineation from pre-2003 and post-2003, which I think covers the Palmeiros kind of perjuring himself in front of Congress and Manny Ramirez's two failed tests. I mean, Clemens and Bonds didn't need that stuff. They took it later in the career. They extended their careers and probably padded their milestone stats, but they weren't doing that stuff. At least Bonds, I don't think, was doing it when he was with the Pirates, and I don't think he was doing it with the Giants until he saw in the bottle of Andro in McGuire's locker at Shea in '98. So I've consistently voted for them with the internet vote, and I voted for Vlad and what was the other, and Pudge. Those are the ones that the internet writers put in today, and I voted for them. I think that Bonds and Clemens will get in. Probably will take a couple years. And as you said, Hoffman fell 5 votes short. And who else was at 70% today?
Vlad was at 70. I think Edgar was at 60, I want to say.
I mean, Schilling a lot too.
Schilling lost a bunch today. And that's there's two cases. You can look at the quality of his recent character, or the reason why I didn't vote for him wasn't because of that, but there, in between some very, very high peaks were some pretty good valleys as well.
Matt,
no, I agree. I
was going to say, Matt, I know you had a ballot that you tweeted, I think, today. What's your stance on the PED guys in Bonds and Clemens?
Personally, I look at it as they purposely cheated the game and they knew it. It's definitely a sticky situation, and I totally understand people who say, oh, well, there were plenty of Hall of Famers who are in there now who have juiced and we just don't know, or their suspicions or things came out later. You can't control all that. But I think that it's up to the writers to use the best of their ability to that discretion. I mean, there's a character clause, and I think it's still there, so you have to respect it. Personally, I think that if you tried to cheat the game, that you don't deserve to be in the Hall. I mean, Pete Rose, one of the greatest hitters of all time, and he's not in. And I think that's the right decision.
It's a tough club to get into because you need to get 75% of the people to agree to it.
Exactly. I know.
And you really can't get 75% of a group of people to agree where they want on their pizza, or even if they want pizza. So, that's a tough one. I think what's eventually going to happen, in my view, is that someone is going to admit who's already in there that I used. And you got to throw that person out. And I think whoever it is at that point, you just kind of go, well, I mean, just at this point, it's all essentially, except for in the case of Bonds and Clemens, who I think certainly are a little more in just finger pointing usage. For a lot of these cases, such as Bagwell and Piazza and Rodriguez, it's more of a he said, and not necessarily they failed tests.
And the other problem the Hall of Fame has is the whole voting for 10 rule is a big problem. because it leaves off guys like Jeff Kent. It leaves off guys that maybe like a Musina or a Schilling or a Larry Walker, guys that you might consider, but you can't really consider because you only have 10 names and you have to organize your ballot. Like I know Jorge Posada got left off the ballot, and I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, but some argue that you should get consideration for it. And you look at next year, Chipper Jones is on the ballot next year. He's going to get he's going to get in. Omar Vizquel might not get in first ballot, maybe, but he's one of the better defensive shortstops.
He won't get in the first year. He won't get in the first year.
No, but I mean, the rule of 10 basically says that the play of one player affects the play of another. I mean, if you were having to choose 10 players and you're looking at this 11th guy and you're like, well, since these guys are more deserving, but you still think he's just as deserving, I mean, he's got to be left out. I think that every single player that steps onto a baseball field is either a Hall of Famer and they're not, but the Hall of Fame process doesn't see it that way.
I like for 1 year, everyone on the ballot, because we're especially going into a log jam, be a specific up or down, yes or no. And if it means you put in 7 or 8 in 1 year, it means you put in 7 or 8, but just get that log jam over with.
Maybe it will once the ballots get revealed publicly next year.
For the first time, yeah.
Yeah, that play a big difference. I know I saw Ryan, I think it's Thibodeau, not Mr. Tibbs on Twitter. He has the ballot tracker.
Yep.
And he did great stuff if you haven't seen it. And he did a tweet like an hour ago on the difference in voting percentages between public ballots and private ballots. And there was a 20% disparity between Bonds and Clemens. Ching had a big one. So stuff like that is really interesting to see, and to see what kind of difference it makes next year.
They're all public starting next year. So I'll exit with this question then. Who do you think that is now sitting outside should be in?
Sitting outside currently on this ballot?
Yeah. Who do you think is the most deserving player not to be enshrined?
I think it's Guerrero, easily. You look at his numbers, and I looked at last night. I have the article up on District on Deck today. You look at his stats in Montreal. I mean, his best season, he was 4th in the MVP behind Lance Berkman, Albert Pujols, and Barry Bonds. I think about 450 home runs, and he was one of the better defensive throwing arms in right field. Plus, I know Baseball Reference has intentional walks weren't updated things like 1955. Vladimir Guerrero has the 5th most intentional walks of any player in baseball. So that's a guy pitchers never wanted to face, naturally because he would just swing at anything. But so you couldn't really intentionally walk him because this guy would swing in the dirt and get a hit out of it.
Oh, yeah. He 9-ironed his way into extra base hits.
But I look at it like this. The minute he left Montreal, first season lost it in Anaheim or Los Angeles, he won MVP, was one of those always consistent on playoff teams with the Angels and Rangers. So even when he left Montreal, he was a Hall of Famer. With Montreal, he definitely was.
Right. Matt?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Vlad. I actually have a jersey for him sitting over here. He's probably my favorite Expo. But I would say that I think the guy that's most deserving is Edgar Martinez. I mean, easily one of the best DHs of all time. And I think that the biggest hit on him is that he was a DH. I think it's one of the dumbest things that you could do. Because why have a position? I mean, there's a huge controversy of people who say that the DH has to exist. I like National League style of play. I've watched it my whole life. But if you're going to have the DH, then you should be voting them into the Hall of Fame. I see no reason to penalize someone just because they're playing a position that's there and doesn't happen to play in the field. I mean, it's like penalizing Billy Wagner. I mean, the guy barely even held on this go-around. And it was ridiculous. I mean, he was a dominant reliever just because he only pitched 1 inning. I mean, Hoffman's going to get in next year for sure. He missed it 5 votes. Edgar Martinez, easily one of the best DHs, and he played over in Seattle where no one was paying attention to him. Very pitcher-friendly park. One of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, both the Kingdome and Safeco were pitching friendly. I think Edgar gets it eventually. I'm going to mention the guy that I think dropped off the ballot this year, or has got one more year, Lee Smith, who I watched. He was one of those who was in that swing era between the fireman who would get the 6 or 7 outs to lock down a save and still could close in the 1-inning era. He just never got the credit. He pitched for some bad teams over the years. He pitched for the Cubs when they weren't very good. He pitched for the Red Sox for a little while, but he just kind of hung on for a long time. I mean, the argument against him is he's a compiler, but if he needed a guy to get you 7 outs, if Bruce Sutter got in the Hall of Fame, I thought Lee Smith was a better pitcher than Bruce Sutter. But that's who I would pick. But I'm not going to argue with Hoffman or Vlad or Edgar. All right, so Bryce Harper made some news today, sending out a tweet saying that Matt Wieters and Greg Holland are more important than the team store and the spring training facility overrun. You guys want to give some thoughts on that little strange thing?
Well, let me add on to what Ron was saying. Jim Bowden tweeted from ESPN and MLB Network Radio that the Nats are still interested in Matt Wieters and Greg Holland, but they're worried about their spring training facility budget. Chelsea Janes came out a few hours ago from the Washington Post, said there's no correlation, a paraphrase, between spring training money and player money. To me, when I look at that tweet, and Bryce Harper, you look at his tweet last month about the Adam Eaton deal, which is kind of ironic that Adam Eaton joined him in the Bryce Harper tweet, because you can interpret that wow tweet on the Eaton deal however you want, even though Bryce added another tweet after that. It's a little bit puzzling because Bryce has been, obviously, he's very outgoing on social media. Look at him deadlifting over 500 pounds on Instagram. You can, the thing with Noah Syndergaard a few weeks ago we talked about, where Syndergaard comments on his Instagram. But I wonder now, you look at the Nationals. I have an article going up on this tomorrow. How much do you cater to Bryce Harper now? You got 2 years left in that deal. If you really want to keep Bryce Harper, and you can make the case giving him $13 million to avoid arbitration, it's kind of like saying, okay, we'll give you this money in hopes that we don't have any more bad blood between the two sides, like Bob Nightingale talked about last month at the winter meetings. So is this a case sort of like basketball, where you're catering to, like the Cavs before LeBron left for Miami, to try to do everything they can to keep him happy? Are you going to try to sign one of these guys now to make Bryce Harper happy? And if you don't, is Bryce angry and makes it further that he doesn't want to stay here because you don't have the money to get these guys?
I'll let Matt answer that first.
Well, I mean, you look at the next 2 years of where they have Harper locked down for sure, and they're clearly going all in. I mean, the Adam Eaton deal, even if Harper didn't like it at first, that was clearly a sign that they're in on these next 2 years. Well, I mean, next to 5, actually, with his contract. But these next 2 years are clearly crucial to them. They're making a lot of win-now moves. They're easily a top 2 or 3, if you want to stretch it, team in the National League. Yes, I think that you have the player whose potential is through the roof. I mean, you look at his MVP season, he has the ability to play just as well as Mike Trout, which is just out of my mind. But yeah, I think that since you've only got 2 years of him, you need to look at this as a time to contend while maybe still building for the future. But I mean, if you really want to talk about windows, this is the time to do it.
Mr. Harper needs to realize that basketball and baseball are different sports. While LeBron James and Kobe Bryant could kind of dictate terms with their teams, baseball rosters are twice the size of basketball rosters. You have 9 people on the field at the same time, and you usually use 3 or 4 pitchers a game. You just can't, if you try to cater to one particular player's every whim, or if they acquiesce and say, okay, we'll give you what you want, it really hampers what they can do down the line. I can understand kind of where his frustration is, because I think everyone's kind of wondering, well, who's going to be the closer for this team this year? But I think someone from the front office needs to sit down and say, you really can't be doing that. And if he balks, then, as both of you said, he's got 2 years left. The window is there. You go win now and let the chips fall where they may after the 2018 World Series. If they got one, great. If not, we'll know a lot more, I think, about where they stand with Bryce Harper at the end of this offseason, or at the end of this, whenever this season ends, because I don't see them letting this become a distraction over the 17-18 offseason as we get into the 2018 regular season. I think we see some sort of resolution then, whether it's hinted that yes, he might want to stay, or if he continues to do this, there's gonna be some rumblings along. When Masson kind of gave the indication that Joe Ross might be traded, if you remember that during the winter meetings, Think about where that came from. They have ways to get their messages out when they're unhappy with people.
And that's where we had one of our writers, Robbie Shatako's tweet in, does Bryce Harper's tweet show he doesn't have faith in the organization? I don't believe that. I think Bryce trusts this organization. I think he looks at the win. Look, the Nationals have been one of the more consistent winning franchises of the last 5 years. Yes, I know they haven't won a round, and I know my article the other day talked that a lot of people said that. But you have to look back to where this team was when Bryce started as a rookie to where they are now. They have made the moves necessary to win. Now, they haven't gotten everybody they wanted. You can argue they've missed out on 5 or 6 guys over the last couple of years. But it ends up there. Mike Rizzo's plan Bs and plan Cs work out probably better than a lot of GM's plan B. So I think Harper sees, especially after last year, the Daniel Murphy move panned out. You look at what they can do at the deadline, like Melanson last year, getting him for, I think, next to nothing, and even where they had to get up Rivero. So I don't think his tweets really show. I think he's just tweeting that he wants the players. That he likes Matt Wieters. He likes Greg Holland. And he just wants to see this team get better. I don't think it's showing that he doesn't think this team can sign him, because you look at the prices that are the longer this goes. If Matt Wieters is still out there February 1st, I think the Nats have a realistic shot at signing him, because I don't really see any of those that would do it. My thought was Atlanta, but there's no indication of that. And you look at Holland, if they throw the opt-out in there for Holland, it wouldn't be a bad idea, because Mike Rizzo keeps looking for bullpen help. We saw Byron Kerr, I think, tweet this, I think it was last week, if they're still interested. As longer that they keep reporting that they're interested in bullpen help, they're getting somebody. I don't think they're going into an all-in year, and I've said this since the beginning of the offseason, with Blake Trinan as the closer or Sean Kelly. That's not the way you do it.
No,
Yeah.
if you look at the team's payroll right now, it's hovering around 150 million. Last year it ended 170. It shows that they've at least got room to make a couple of moves now or wait until the deadline, something along the lines, because they're definitely willing to spend a little bit more than they are right now. I think, even with mass and constraints, and if these spring training things are true, I still think they've got a little bit of financial flexibility to make at least 1 or 2 moves. And I wouldn't even say it'd be the worst thing in the world to wait until the season starts, because you're going to have guys like Colomé and Robertson who maybe they get off to slower starts and their price drops a little bit, and that goes more to the Nats price range. Well, I think that they definitely could use Holland, and I definitely think it'd be a good move. I wouldn't be 100% opposed to them taking the roster they have right now going into opening day.
Well, Vegas has them as a 10-1 favorite to win the National League. They're second favorites behind the Cubs to win with the roster that they have now. So it's pretty, it's a pretty solid roster. As far as Harper not trusting the organization, look, he wants to win. I think this isn't just trying to boost his numbers. I think he wants that championship. We're going to go all in. Okay, let's go all in. Can we do it with what we have now? Spend the money. We know we have it. I think that they probably will get Holland at least. I think that they will be. I think they're fine at catcher. I think they'll be fine with Derek Norris as catcher. I think if they can get Holland and Scott Boras to drop the opt-out after 1 year, I think if he would take a 2-year deal without the opt-out, I think they would do it right now. Personally. Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think it's tough, though, the 2 guaranteed years, because coming off of the Tommy John that Greg Holland is, saw the reports from the showcase, the velocity isn't there. It's tough to really give a guy 2 years. You still have 1 more year of Sean Kelly. You don't know where Sean Kelly's going to be as great as he was last year. Most of the bullpen guys are okay with. Trinan's got a lot of years left. Sleece has a lot of years left. Coda Glover is going to be a huge X factor this year. Hurt at the end of last season. If he's healthy and earns the trust from Dusty Baker and Mike Maddox, kind of like what Trinan had to do with last year, Glover can earn a big-time role. And Sammy Solis is the big X factor in this, because Dusty Baker used him in every game in that Dodgers series. And
he was good.
When he's healthy, and he can get lefties and righties, unlike the other left-hander they have in that bullpen, and Oliver Perez. And I think the other X factor out there is the guy they signed to a minor league deal. I mean, Neil Kotz. That was a very underrated move. He worked with Mike Maddox in Texas and had a really good year a couple of years ago. He can still get left-handed hitters out. I wouldn't be surprised. There's always that one pitcher, and we don't know the full list of non-roster guys yet. But Neil Kotz could be a name that kind of creeps in the mix here as another left-hander if they move Solis or somebody else into a late inning role.
I did a piece on Trinan, Glover, and Kelly to see which one would be the best fit, making the case for each one of them. And I'm intrigued by Glover. I think age probably holds him out of the discussion this year in lack of experience. But his raw numbers are so outstanding that, I think you got to give him a shot at some point, or at least give him the thing to see what he can do. You talked about this, Ricky, about Kelly and his Tommy John surgery, and can he come off a second or third day in a row to pitch? And Trinan, for me, I mean, a lot of his numbers are outstanding, but he has a 3.7 walks per 9 ratio. You don't want, if you're in a one-run game, you don't want to walk the tying run on base, right?
No, I would agree, and that's I think where Trinan to me is still that guy you bring in when you need a double play. I think he can earn that closer role over. People forget how dominant Sean Kelly was in September last year. He was going in strong. He wasn't used as much in the playoff series, which was a little bit surprising. But he has experience being the closer. He did it for Papelbon last year and was pretty good. I think one of the saves he blew was because Michael Taylor forgot how to play a ball in center field in the Yasiel Puig, which is one of the more frustrating games from last season.
That was against the Dodgers, right?
Yep, that was the Michael Taylor 5 strikeout game and make an error in center field to end the game at 1:30 in the morning, which wasn't great. But we'll move on. We'll discuss that at a different time. But I think Kelly, to me, I don't mind him starting it. It's like you said, though. Can I rely on him 2 days in a row? And I don't know if you can win a closer by committee in a league that has Wade Davis, that has Kenley Jansen, and that eventually, if we'll see with the suspension, but eventually the Mets are going to have Familia, and arguably those 3 teams, and Melanson now in San Francisco, so you can throw 4 teams, have way better closer situations than you.
When Taylor had the 5 strikeouts, did FP actually find something nice to say about that during the game?
I was watching that on ESPN, so I did not.
Okay.
Yes.
Matt, who do you think is the best internal option for closer?
We've actually talked about this before, but I personally love Blake Trinan. I mean, the guy hits 97. Ricky's mentioned before that he struggles to get left-handers out, but the guy, he's improved over the last 2 years in terms of his lefty splits. He's only getting better, and a ground ball machine. I mean, strikeouts are sexy, don't get me wrong, but I think the ground ball is a very underrated weapon. I mean, you look at what Tanner Roark's been able to do with that, and I think Blake Trinan would be an absolute blessing at closer. Obviously, I think they're going to have to test him out in spring training, see how he does. But in the end, I think he would be the best option. I mean, I like Cody Glover a lot, but he doesn't have enough experience. And Kelly's the veteran. He definitely strikes hitters, but the back-to-back appearances really just bothers me. I mean, you're going to need him to step up in those situations, and when it comes down to it, he hasn't been able to fulfill that.
We're going to run a piece from our contributor Roddy Stratikos on Friday on Sammy Sillies. Matt, do you think that's viable? I mean, could he be the surprise candidate coming out to finish in the 9th?
Absolutely. I mean, he's definitely shown that he's durable. You look at what he was in the playoffs last year. It was a surprise to the rest of the league, but it really wasn't a surprise to anyone that's been following the Nats all year. He had that injury that had him out for a little while, but he didn't even start the year. He lost that beginning job to Matt Belisle, but then when Belisle went down with the injury, he came in. He made an appearance and showed that he deserved to be there and stayed there up the rest of the season. So I absolutely think he can compete. I know Dusty loves to use him, and it'll be interesting to see what they do.
All right, Matt, I'll ask you this before we go. What are you looking forward to most this season?
Besides just watching baseball again, I'm looking for Steven Strasburg this year. I mean, the guy, he got handed so much money last year. Surprise move. I mean, he was going to be the big ticket player of the offseason. But I personally, I've loved watching Strasburg. The guy, honestly, he's flown as an under the radar pitcher, which is hard to believe considering he was drafted number 1. But the fact that everyone thinks he should be Clayton Kershaw and he's not, has made a lot of people realize how good he is actually, or fail to realize how good he's actually been. I mean, the guy strikes out players like no other. When he's healthy, he's one of the best in the league. He showed that last year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, after this full offseason of rest with no setbacks, see if he can put together a full year. I mean, he did back in 2013. The Nats didn't make the playoffs, but he finished top 10, I know, in Cy Young. He's shown that he's up there. So I'm hoping that he can finally put together a full healthy season.
I was going to say, Ron, you can make the case going back to August 2015 when Strasburg came back from injury as well. He ended that year strong, came into the last year, was fully healthy, arguably a top 10 pitcher in the game. But you look at now with the trades in the pitching rotation, you're relying now with Strasburg and Joe Ross to stay healthy because you don't have a lot of pitching depth right now, and that kind of goes under the radar. So it's critical with Strasburg healthy, Scherzer with the stress fracture and the knuckle. We'll see how that heals, and now Tanner Roark in the World Baseball Classic to start off with. More emphasis is going to be on Strasburg in spring training because Scherzer will be rehabbing and Roark obviously won't be there after the first couple of weeks.
Last year the Nats did have, I know it might have been the least, but it's at least the bottom 3 player or day spent on the DL last season. And remember after 2 seasons ago, the Nats fired their entire medical staff and brought in a whole new team where they walked around with iPads during spring training, asking questions about how much sleep they got. And Mike Rizzo called it the new money ball. And I mean, you look at the Nats really didn't have any injuries up until Strasburg and Ramos right at the end. But for most of the season, they were a pretty healthy team, and that's why they were able to do so well. So I think that they've got a good system in there right now.
Ricky, what are you looking forward to most this year?
To me, I'm looking at this offense, and I'm looking at the top of the order in particular. I don't know how Dusty Baker is going to align this lineup. There's a lot of left-handed hitters, so Dusty can't exactly bunch them together. But I know we talked about this on the last DoDCast. To me, Trey Turner and Adam Eaton are going to be so much fun to watch because with that speed, Turner a full season with that aggressive base running that Dusty Baker and Davey Lopes love to do, he's going to steal more bases. Adam Eaton, who doesn't usually steal a lot of bases, I think they're going to let him have the green light a lot more than they did in Chicago, where Todd Frazier, I think, had more stolen bases than him last year. That's not going to happen this year. Yeah, it's a crazy stat. I don't know. When Todd Frazier leads your team in stolen bases, that's you're not winning.
Todd Frazier doesn't hit his weight, for crying out loud.
But he steals bases. I don't know how that is. But you add those two in the mix, and when those two guys get on base, it's going to leave more opportunities for Murphy, more opportunities for Harper, and more opportunities for Anthony Rendon, who we saw in MLB Network's top 10 that they're doing on Sundays. Anthony Rendon is number 9 right now on their shredders list at third base. And he's definitely a top, as you saw a couple years ago, top 5 MVP candidate he was. He didn't have his great times in the postseason. Historically was bad with road scoring position during that Dodger series, but he's still one of the best defenders and one of the best power hitters. So I think when you look at this lineup top to bottom, outside of maybe catcher right now, this team is pretty deep. And I saw what the Steamer projections on Fangraphs. If Ryan Zimmerman hits 20 home runs, I'll be thrilled.
Oh, yeah.
I hope he stays healthy enough to hit 20 home runs. Now that Bryce Harper has kind of taken this kind of outspoken, I guess, kind of a leadership position, take the bull by the horns and be public about how you feel, I want to see how he reacts on the field. I want to see if he can be that 340, 110 guy that he thinks he can be. Because if he does, they're going to the World Series. Just for the reasons that you mentioned before, Ricky, because they can steal bases, because they can get on base. He's going to have opportunities to drive runs home. And he's got, he's with Daniel Murphy to back him up.
Anthony Rendon at the back of that lineup, too. If he even takes one step forward, I mean, that I think he has the potential to be a 300 hitter at some point. He had that weird power outage the first couple months and still ended up hitting 20 homers at the end of the year. So he continues that hot hitting from the second half. There's no doubt in my mind he could hit at least 30. And then coming out of the 5 spot, I mean, you'll take that any day.
Oh, my goodness, yes. And you got Jason Worth in the back end of the lineup now who can protect them all because his eye's still pretty good. For a 38-year-old, his OPS plus last year was 99. That's an average player. It's a league average player at 38 years old.
You'll take that any day.
All right, Matt, tell us where you can find your. Actually, I should give Matt some props. He was you're the sports editor at James Madison's newspaper, right?
Yes, been covering the football team this year.
Congratulations on your national championship, by the way. I watched some of that game.
Thank you. Yeah, it was awesome. I got to go down to Frisco, and I even got to go up to North Dakota for the semifinals. So it's been a lot of fun to cover them. They're a great team.
So Matt's got stuff going on all the time over there, and his profile of the coach at James Madison was absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed reading that. So tell them where we can find you on Twitter and all that. And you also write for Call of the Pen.
So follow me on Twitter at Cuz It Matters. That's CUZITMATTERS. I do write for Call of the Pen. District on Deck I've written for 2 years now. And at the Breeze JMU. Check it out.
All right, Ricky, where can people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at Rickinator555. Obviously doing a lot for District on Deck. I have, again, the article on Tim Raines is up. I did one on Vlad. I did one on Pudge a couple weeks ago. I tweeted from the Twitter account during the Hall of Fame announcements. You can check those out. But yeah, I think we're doing some great things here. Matt's doing awesome. Our whole staff is doing great. Want to give them a shout out as well. Robbie, Chris, Daniel, Frank, Rob, the whole 9 yards. Everybody's doing great. So just keep looking out for our stuff. And we're on our Facebook page. We're doing a countdown to spring training. Check that out. Only less than 30 days to go. So pretty soon everybody's going to be gathered in West Palm, and we'll have actually some baseball to talk about.
This season can't come fast enough. I am so ready for anything. Caribbean World Series, some T-ball in the snow here in New England, anything with a bat and a ball on.
World Baseball Classic early March. I know Ron and I love that.
Yeah, I love meaningful baseball in March. I really do. You can follow me, where's the camera, at Ron Chuckett on Twitter, and of course you can follow all of us at District on Deck. And I will have a summary of. We'll talk a little Hall of Fame, and we'll talk about the state of the franchise coming up later on this week too. So give us a like on there on Facebook, because we really would appreciate that, and follow us on Twitter at District on Deck. And we're going to be producing, at least hopefully starting soon, 3 pieces of fresh content for you a day, along with doing this and chatting with you on Twitter and Facebook. So for Matt and Ricky, I'm Ron Chuckett. We'll talk to you the next time. Where is this?